And now to introduce our featured speaker, Dr. Lisa Mennet, someone who understands deeply what it means to sit with children and families in moments of vulnerability. Dr. Mennet is a leading voice in infant and early childhood mental health, with a lifelong focus on how trauma shapes early relationships and how healing begins through reflection and attunement. She earned her PhD in infant mental health from the University of Washington and has spent decades teaching, mentoring, and walking alongside professionals in the field. Many know her through her work training practitioners in the FAN model, which she will talk about today, and through the reflective consultation she has provided to home visiting, early intervention, and mental health teams. Please join me in welcoming someone I have looked up to for a very long time, Dr. Lisa Mennet.
Thank you so much to the Foundation for inviting me to be with you today. I've long admired the work of the Foundation and its grantees. Your devotion to the well-being of children and families makes our community stronger every day. I also want to thank the Foundation and Dr. Danielson for always creating such a warm and welcoming space for all of us. It feels like a balm to be together today. I feel like I also need to say that it feels a little challenging to be in a contemplative mood today. Like many of you, I feel really scared for families and really angry. It feels like a time for action. And I think the thing that is helping me is to be with you, to hear Dr. Danielson's incredibly inspiring and thought provoking and beautiful words. And to think about how, when we build community, we are engaged in action. And how, when we expand our own skills for meeting the needs of families, we are engaged in action. And how, when we are coming to know ourselves better as professionals and as individuals, we are getting ready for action as well. So I was asked to share some thoughts about attuning with clients and families in particular. And so many of the examples that I'm going to offer today focus on that circumstance, but I hope the ideas will be broadly useful because we all have had experiences with communication that is challenging. It might be having a conversation with your teenager. It might be entering into a performance review if you're a supervisor or a supervisee. And of course, it is the case when you're listening to the experiences of children and families who are struggling. We all know what it feels like to worry that we're not going to be able to find the words, as Dr. Ben says. When I was a beginning therapist, way back in the day, I was assigned my first clinical family to work with through the training program in my clinic, the clinic in my training program. And at that point, I was as inexperienced as they come, but also really excited, both scared and excited by the prospect of meeting a family and trying to be helpful. One of the ways that I tried to sort of glue myself together was trying to anticipate as much of the conversation as possible. And so I knew a little bit about the family from the intake information. So I figured parent's going to say A, and then I'll respond with B. And then, of course, they'll say C, and I'll be ready with D, right? So this was my strategy internally. And you can imagine that it did not go very far when confronted with an actual human. We're all learning. The thing that I needed to learn was to be okay with uncertainty, because that's what communication is. And also to cultivate a sense of wonder. And by wonder, I mean both like, I wonder, and also wonder in the sense of a little bit of awe, the awe that comes from appreciating the full, surprising, unpredictable humanity of another person. And then finding a way to be excited about what the two of you are going to create in conversation together. So here is a lovely phrase by one of the mothers of the infant and early childhood mental health field, Jeree Paul. This is what I needed to find. in my work as a new therapist. This idea that how you are, this what you show up with, it's kind of intangible. The space that you make for others is as important as what you do. They're both important. Bringing your expertise as somebody who is helping families is important. But today we're going to focus more on this question of the how you are. Dree was amazing and had lots of super amazing things to say. And this was another one of her sayings: do unto others as you would have others do unto others. So a pretty interesting and provocative variation on the golden rule. The original, of course, really looks at relationships through a lens of fairness. But Dree's version, her variation, really speaks to our hope, not for ourselves, but for our communities. And I think that's really appropriate for this group today. We're all here because we want everybody, all the families we know, all the individuals that we work with, to be afforded safety and belonging and dignity. And we're all likely trying to figure out how to push back against the growing waves of cruelty that are all around us. When we come at it this way, we're honoring the other person in ways that both help us feel grounded in our own values and also that ripple out into the wider world. So I'm going to share some ideas with you in kind of three ways today. First, we're going to talk a little bit about this notion of being reflective or taking a reflective stance. What are some foundational ideas and attitudes that help us improve our readiness to work with families? Then I'm going to offer some really practical suggestions that come to us from a tool called the FAN, which was specifically developed to help family serving professionals find better attunement with families. Throughout, we're also going to pause a few times and take a few moments to explore these ideas of reflection and attunement through somatic practice. So just to play a little bit with some simple techniques to help you explore and maybe expand your nervous system's ability to stay centered, to stay balanced when interactions are surprising or challenging. This group, I know, is made up of folks who share a deep compassion for children and families, but who work in a wide variety of settings and in a wide variety of roles. So I'm offering a variety of ideas. Some might be familiar to you and others might be new. I really just want to invite you to not worry about remembering or incorporating all of this. If you leave with just one or two thoughts about things that you might want to try, that will be fantastic. So let's start with playing with this idea of what it means to take a reflective stance. In many ways, the word stance can be a really powerful launching point. The dictionary defines stance as the way in which someone stands, especially when deliberately adopted, as in baseball or golf, or in my little logo here, my little icon of yoga, a person's posture. So, what is the posture of an attuned, reflective listener? I want to suggest that it's not a posture of passivity or neutrality, but a posture of staying steady, so that we're not pulled by the forces that are out there, maybe wanting to pull us in different directions. So I'm going to talk today about some of these forces and how powerful it can be to increase our awareness, not so that we ignore them, but so that we can put them to better use to help others without being knocked off balance ourselves. So let's first just take a moment to ground ourselves. We'll take a little moment for some somatic practice and check in on how your nervous system's feeling today. Whatever you are feeling is just fine, but it can be really great to just notice where you're starting from. So if it would feel good, I invite you to take a few breaths. maybe to rock your feet back and forth on the floor. And as you feel a little more settled, notice what that sensation is in your body. How do you know that you feel more settled? Is there a place in your body that feels comfortable and steady? Can you focus on that for a moment? Now take a moment to see what floats to the surface as I ask you to think about a time where you were anticipating or maybe in a conversation that was difficult. As you remember this moment, can you shift back to an awareness of your body and check to see if the memory evokes sensations, maybe in your belly, your jaw, your shoulders? Can you just notice with acceptance and curiosity? Now, I invite you to bring your awareness back to that place in your body that felt steady, comfortable, grounded. Breathe into that sensation for a moment. And then when you're ready, you can come back to the group. This very simple somatic practice is really just a way for us to play with the experience of noticing that we are grounded and comfortable, noticing that things are shifting to an uncomfortable place, and then noticing that we have the power and the capacity and the resource to come back to that grounded place. So let's go back to this idea of the reflective stance. Maybe one of the most important aspects of taking in a reflective stance is just appreciating and being aware that interactions are made up of both what's explicit, what's talked about, what we both know, what we recognize, and the implicit. The implicit would be unspoken currents, things that sit under the surface. Let's say that we're aware of of the child that we're working with, for instance, has a trauma history. And that really helps us understand her angry and withdrawn behavior. So this information is above the surface. But we also need to remain conscious of the fact that there are many aspects of the way that she has made sense of those traumas that are still a mystery to us. Or let's say we're running late. Let's say I'm running late to a meeting with a parent. I'm super aware. My heart is racing. I'm feeling really anxious. I really don't want to be late. And yet, there can still be things below awareness, unsaid even to ourselves, even to me, that are still affecting our behavior. So maybe I'm not quite really aware of my worry that the other person's going to be really mad at me, or that the other person is going to be thinking that I'm inadequate. So when I meet them, I might profusely apologize in an attempt to kind of ward off these bad feelings. And the problem with that, of course, a family deserves an apology, a parent deserves an apology. But if I don't understand what's driving my feelings, I kind of take up a lot of space and don't leave space for the parent to have their own reaction. What would it be like if instead, as I'm rushing, I can know enough about myself to say, oh man, this is my soft spot. Or as Kristen Neff, who writes about self-compassion, this is a moment of suffering for me. I know that I'm susceptible to feeling inadequate. So it's on me to know that and to regulate it so that I'm not pushing it all out there into the world, but I'm acting responsibly and leaving enough space for the other person to have whatever experience they need to have. To be reflective as helping individuals, we try to expand our capacity to hold in awareness as best we can. It's always a work in progress, both what's above the waterline and an appreciation for everything that's below it. Practices like reflective supervision, like peer support, and really like our own therapy can all help us with understanding all of these forces. With greater awareness, we have more choices in how we can respond. Cultivating an appreciation for what's under the surface of the waterline often can look like this first idea, and it's not new to you. It's the idea of bringing the past into the present moment. We are all, of course, shaped by our early experiences within our families, within our communities, our cultural traditions, our own experiences of trauma and how we've made sense of them. Sometimes we and the children and families we're working with are able to express these experiences verbally. Sometimes we are not. We may have little or no idea how the past is intruding on the present. In our field, we talk about the idea of ghosts, ghosts in the nursery, which comes to us from Selma Freiberg, who really understood that these deep-seated feelings, deep-seated associations, deep-seated just ways of walking through our lives, and that they might be shaped by and formed by early experiences, maybe of violence, of prejudice or exclusion, and that these experiences get reactivated in the present, perhaps never more so than in work with families. We know as a species that we are all very sensitive to the vulnerability of little people. And nothing brings ghosts forward more for parents than parenting children. It stirs up our feelings and experiences of having been vulnerable ourselves as children. And sometimes these feelings can be too painful, really, to think about. Or they come from such an early time in our life that we don't necessarily have a way of talking about them, of bringing them from under the waterline up into what we can see and talk about. We also can talk about angels, those figures from our past that helped us, that saw us, that recognized us, and whose influence and kind of presence internally still affect us. Alicia Lieberman wrote really beautifully about how powerful it can be to help families locate kind of internally their angels, to recall the ways that somebody really, really saw them. And, this can happen throughout our lifetimes. One of the ways that I helped myself as a young therapist was to evoke the presence internally of a very treasured teacher whose steadiness and kindness continued to echo within me. If you're a therapist, an important therapeutic goal would be potentially to work towards integrating the past into the present by carefully bringing the ghosts out of the dark and into the light, by helping a parent consider how the past is coloring their behavior with their child. This work can be painstaking, gradual, and uncovering, understanding, and integrating. And that level of work might be out of the scope of practice for many other family serving professionals, where the goals of the work are more focused on skill development or concrete support. But these other professionals can absolutely make use of the idea of the past and the present nonetheless. Imagine a parent new to a social service program who's asked to fill out the typical paperwork before meeting with a provider. And then the provider ushers the parent into her office or the parent angrily confronts her. What is the deal with all this paperwork? The provider, let's call her Maria, is taken by surprise. And her immediate internal response is to feel defensive and confused. She might be saying to herself, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? But remembering the idea of the past and the present, she steadies herself. Maybe she's able to say, something got stirred up here. Maybe this isn't about me. We've never even met before. And with just that thought, she's able to regulate herself and respond in a way that helps build the relationship. She might go on to say, I hear this experience wasn't great for you. Can you tell me about it? The parent then maybe says, why do you need all this information? I don't even know you people. And now Marie imagines the possibility of past experiences with other agencies, other helpers that might have not gone very well. And she says, you're right, there are questions here that might feel personal. How about we slow down and look at the form together? We can figure out what's required today and let the rest go for now. You should be in charge of what you share and when. By just considering the past and the present, Maria, without naming the dynamic to the parent, without asking the question, is able to make a shift that helps her regain her footing and then returns control and agency back to the parent. It also models this idea that emotions are information, they're data for us, and they can help point us in the right direction of an interaction. They also, in this particular case, Maria's ability to manage it in this way demonstrates to the parent that emotions can be tolerated, thought about, and regulated. A very important balance point, we're talking about these different balance points for holding that reflective stance, is our growing awareness for what we bring to the interaction. And where we come from and what has shaped us. I'm sure that you've all participated in conversations and learning around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the last few years. And if you're white, you know that it's important that we hold awareness of the ways that being white in our culture supports privilege, because it's so easy to not notice or question that. We have to ask ourselves, how do my assumptions that this is just the way the world works impact my judgment and my ability to understand someone from another culture or group? Doing this work of self-knowledge is, of course, critical in the context of working with diverse families. It encompasses our values and our experiences, our sense of self in ways that can support the work. Let's say when maybe we feel like we really understand a family's experience, or potentially can complicate it when there's difference. The difference can be visible and explicit, like a difference in background, race, community. It can be subtle, like a difference in parenting philosophy, a difference in tolerance for conflict, or even an assumption about what our role is. Early in my work, I'm telling you all my terrible secrets in this, so bear with me. Early in my work with young children and families, I met a mother and her 4-year-old son. She came to me out of some concerns about behaviors that he was struggling with in his daycare setting. They were recent immigrants from a country with strong cultural differences from the US. And in our first visit, the mom instructed her son to address me as Teacher Lisa. And in that moment, I was taken aback. I had to do a little quick internal work to orient myself and to, make the connection that she was offering me an important sign of respect, coming as she did from a culture that reveres teachers. And I also had to make a little note in that moment of where I was coming from. And I mean, not just, Western culture, but also the particular culture of Western psychotherapy training that makes some important distinctions between the work of being a teacher and being a therapist. So this little story just underlines the gaps that can happen when we're not culturally aligned with clients and the tremendous care we need to take under these less than ideal circumstances, um, when we must hold our assumptions in our awareness and listen very carefully. So this brings us to this question about identification. Who we feel naturally aligned with, it's super powerful. It can be really helpful. Having this feeling that you understand families because their experience is like your own. Perhaps you are members of the same group. Um, Perhaps they have had an experience with a medical or developmental problem or a family issue like divorce or domestic violence that you yourself have experienced. Or you may have worked with many, many families with this background and you know the territory very well. We can all understand the profound advantages of having these traits or experiences in common. The person that you're feeling with can have this tremendous sense of relief that you're going to get it because of this shared background. And this is a super powerful thing, which is why working with a culturally matched provider can be transformative. But it also can lead us to another interesting balancing point. Because while the identification with a particular child or family can be an important kind of shortcut into what is left unsaid about their lives, at the same time, we need to just remember our reflective stance and we need to hold these identities and identifications in our awareness rather than taking them for granted. Because the danger, of course, is that aspects of shared experience shut down our curiosity. How do we stay reflective and avoid falling into the trap of just assuming consciously or unconsciously, oh, well, this must be just like that? So let's take another moment for some reflection internally. Take a couple of breaths and see if you can recall a time when you were working with someone. It might be a client, parent, where you had this strong sense of identification. Oh, wow, she is like me. I know what that feels like. Do you know specifically what you had in common? And do you remember as you think about that, how it felt in your body? Oh, I know what that feels like. Now recall a time where maybe you were talking with or working with somebody who is not like you, somebody who felt mysterious to you, where what was under the surface of the water was big. And as you shift your awareness to thinking about that interaction, what do you notice internally? The point of this is not that difference is bad. It's really just that when we can use our bodies and our nervous systems as information, we become more familiar with what's going on in the moment so that we can stay more aware. You know, we can have that sense of, oh, there's that little twinge. I need to pay attention to that. And we can stay better poised between this idea of knowing, of surety, of like, oh gosh, I know what that's like, and not knowing, of wondering. So just familiarizing ourselves with what knowing feels like, what surety feels like, and what does curiosity or wonder feel like. So now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about this tool that some of you may have been exposed to and others have just been hearing this term called the fan. So here's our fan. It's shaped like a fan. We can fan ourselves with it. And of course, there's a ton of words here, and I'm going to explain it all. So don't get too worried about everything that's there. But first, let me tell you a little bit about where it came from. The fan is a tool that was developed by Linda Gilkerson at Erickson Institute in Chicago. Dr. Gilkerson was developing this tool specifically to support home visitors who were working with fussy babies. And what she discovered in her, decades of work supporting families like this was that the experience of being deeply seen and understood was transformative for families. Having a really fussy baby may be one of the hardest things that somebody's ever going to deal with, certainly as a parent. There are so many feelings of inadequacy, of guilt, of shame, and definitely of isolation. And so, what Dr. Gilkerson was able to do was see how this sense of being understood um, was transformed, and parents moved from feeling hopeless and helpless to feeling like they could respond, hold, metabolize distress in really different ways. And I think that the thing that makes the fan so useful isn't that it's like a set of brand new skills that you haven't heard of before. You will recognize some of the ideas that I'm going to cover. It's really the elegance with which Linda organized and explained these attunement skills and then linked them together with cues to help us understand when we can move between and among the processes. It's really this idea of like having a set of tools in your tool bag in the moment when you're disorganized, in the moment where you feel overwhelmed. Okay, now I know I can grab my tools when the interaction is getting hard. So I'm going to introduce you to just a taste of how the fan can be used to deepen these skills for listening and following. And then later in our panel discussion, Megan Jimenez is going to tell you a little bit more about what a full fan training is like, because this is just a little taste. So don't worry about taking it all in, but you might note like, oh, there's one or two things here that I'd really like to try. Before we jump in, though, we're really talking about the idea of mismatch and repair. And this idea there's a really interesting statistic that comes from infancy research that looks at the way that parents and babies create this kind of conversational dance using vocalizations and eye contact and body posture where they're really in sync. And then, strangely enough, this percentage of time that we are synchronized also shows up with adults and their therapists in therapy, and really just between adults in regular conversation. So, we're going to have a poll, and I'd like you to just, you may know this statistic, which is great. If not, just guess what percentage of time you think conversational partners are in tune or synchronized. Are we able to see the results? Ah, okay. I'm looking at the results over on another screen here. And lots of you are saying B, which is 30%, which means that you've all heard this before, which is fabulous. That's correct. And, I've known this statistic for a long time, and it always still kind of amazes me. It helps us understand that mismatching isn't a crisis. It's the inevitable rhythm of two separate people coming together. In fact, the research in infancy shows that mothers and babies who are matched a lot more than this, a lot more than 30% of the time, actually have more problems going forward than the pairs who kind of stay in this range. There's something really important about making space for the self and the other to be like us and to be dislike us, for coming together and mismatching. So the important ability here is to notice the mismatch and make a repair. For the parent of an infant, that might look like noticing that as you've leaned in, the baby has leaned out and turned his head to the side. And then moving back as the parent and waiting a beat for the baby to get reorganized. Having all that stimulation is intense. And the baby needs a beat to get it together and come back with a smile that says, I'm ready for more. What that might look like as a provider working with a parent is noticing that the solutions that you're offering to the situation that they're asking about are kind of falling flat. That's the mismatch. The repair comes from noticing the parent's maybe downcast gaze, maybe tight voice, and thinking, okay, I think we've mismatched. And saying something like, I think maybe I raced ahead with my own ideas. Could we start again? I really want to know what this is like for you. The overview of the fan here I'm going to give you contains these 5 important processes. They all have kind of 2 names. We've got calming, which is mindful self-regulation, feeling, which is empathic inquiry, thinking, which is collaborative exploration, doing, which is capacity building, and reflecting, which we also call integration. Now, we also have another really interesting balance point in this conversation, which is what's in the middle there, which is balancing the provider's concerns, maybe the program's needs, with what's going on with the caregiver or the parent or the person you're talking to. So if you work in housing support, let's say, you're going to be focused on with the family on what's needed to secure a placement for them. If you're a CASA, you're going to be focused on what's going on with the parent that aligns with what the court has determined. But if you're also using the fan, you are explicitly making space for the other person's experiences, feelings, and goals as well. The fan makes space for co-creation. One way that the fan is really explicit about valuing the other person's experience is through what we call the arc of engagement. And this is actually like a series of steps or touch points for an actual conversation that keeps us grounded in attunement. And it begins on the left with self-awareness. How am I doing? Am I ready to be fully present for this conversation? So maybe taking a breath. If not, what do I need to do to be fully present? The next step happens at the beginning of the conversation with the other person. And we like to start with this really simple question. What has it been like for you to take care of your child since we last met? Or what has it been like for you to support these families this week? What has it been like for you to be a parent since we last saw each other? We really want to establish that the other person's felt experience is important to us before jumping into all of the facts and agendas that are also important. Now, within the arc of engagement, sometime in the middle of the visit, we're looking for an opportunity to say something like, I just want to check with you. Are we getting to what's most important for you? What's on your mind today? Which offers an opportunity to check how we're doing on our agenda, to potentially change topics to discuss a deeper concern. People often don't start with the thing that's most, what is weighing on them the most. And it really signals to our conversational partner, you have power here too. At the end of the visit, we do a couple of things that are kind of fun, that are very explicitly intended to look for shared meaning, to use the power of the fact that when we repeat something, we tend to remember it better. So we might do it by asking, was there something that we talked about today that you really want to remember? Some variation on a question like that. And sometimes we might get really surprised what the other person says. We've got it like in our head. Wow, this is an important conversation because blah, blah, blah happened. And then they say something completely different. Super helpful to know, so that we can be tracking and staying attuned. Another thing that we might do, and this works great if you're having a series of ongoing conversations with a client or a parent. Home visitors do this, the fussy babies home visitors do this, and lots of other professionals do too. We ask, what are 3 words that you would use to describe your child this week? And then we make note of the words. Sometimes parents might say something that feels pretty intense to us, or even maybe a little mean, which is super good for us to know. I mean, we'd love to leave with them saying, oh, they were perfect and amazing and smart. That's not realistic. Parents are holding sometimes very conflicting and hard feelings. So if they say something that feels a little difficult, we can say to ourselves that that's really good to know. We say to them, yeah, things are still hard. I hear you, and we're going to keep thinking about this together. A fun thing that many fussy baby and other home visitors of other kinds, folks who maybe work in a really different part of family serving systems have done with these 3 words is that they track them over time. And then at some point, often towards the end of the work together, they might produce what we call a word cloud. I'm sure you're familiar with that, that brings together the things that this parent has said about their child or about the work together since you started. And some parents will take this and put it on their fridge as a way of like really honoring the work that we've done and the time together. Finally, in the arc of the visit, the last step is, again, just for us, which is after the contact, after we've said goodbye, being sure that we remember to check in with ourselves. How am I doing? That might have been a pretty stirring conversation. Do I need a breath of fresh air? Do I need a sip of water? Do I need to talk to my supervisor or to a peer? What do I need to be present for what comes next? The next, so we're going to come back to the fan and talk about these 5 processes or skills. Again, ones that will be familiar to you, but we're talking about how they're connected to each other and reading cues for when it's time to move in and out of them. So this first skill that we emphasized is mindful self-regulation, the calming part of the fan, the part of the fan that's really for us. And of course, it fits perfectly with this idea of the arc of the visit, saying to myself at the beginning and the end, how am I doing? But of course, we want to potentially use these calming skills at any time during the conversation when strong feelings are coming up for us. I think it's really important to say that at best, mindfulness isn't a tool to get us to forget or pass over the truth. There are hard truths out there. And right now, families, what's going on with families makes us feel enraged and frightened on their behalf. And these feelings are justified and they can move us to action that can be really important. But as attuned partners, we still need to find the reflective stance, this balance point that mindfulness can help us with. So it's not that mindfulness is a replacement for action. It helps us choose the best action. There are 4 skills that the FAN training teaches and gives trainees lots of experience using. We have already used at least 3 of them today. We've talked about breathing, we've talked about grounding, we've talked about using imagery, and I'm sure that you've all had lots of experience with this. A 4th that maybe we haven't talked so much about is this idea of self-talk. One example that comes from Linda Gilkerson's training of physicians to use the fan comes from a doctor who was doing rounds. And as he did his rounds and moved from room to room at the hospital, he reset his intention. This is a pretty, being in a hospital is very intense. So, what could he use to reset his intention as he just moved from room to room? And the way he did it was by using kind of a combination of self talk and grounding. As each foot hit the floor, he would say to himself, I'm here to listen. I feel like I used self talk. It's very alive for me in the moment. I was talking to my dad the other day, who's dealing with some really significant health challenges. And he started uncharacteristically for him talking about some of his worries. And I started to feel, whoa, this is intense for me. I thought about the doctor. I'm here to listen. I told myself the self talk I used was, I can make space for this, which really helped me to kind of relax my belly and to really visualize that I'm here to be receptive. So the second process in the fan is the feelings wedged. We call it empathic inquiry. Um, and where people are in feelings, we know that we should linger there with someone that we're working with when they're expressing emotions. Pretty straightforward. And of course, the simple idea is that feelings need to be understood and contained before we can really very effectively move into to thinking and solutions. We're certainly all familiar with the experience of not being able to think clearly ourselves when emotions are high. And empathic inquiry is bringing regulation to the person you're working with and insight for them, just as the mindfulness that we have used helps bring regulation to ourselves. I want to note that the process ideally goes beyond the idea of name it to tame it. If you worked with kids, I'm sure you're familiar with that expression, and it can be really useful. The idea of just like putting a label on all of this turmoil internally can be help us settle. But we're wanting to move just a little further beyond that, which is to say we're not looking to just tame the emotions. We're not looking to shut them down. We're looking to understand them and use them as information and integrate them into our broader experience. The fan teaches some very straightforward skills that I know you're all using. So again, just think of them as like, oh, when I can conceptualize this as my toolbox, it's going to be that much more ready for me in a moment of intensity or challenge. So the first empathic inquiry skill that we talk about is what we call holding. It's holding space. It's the subtle cues that we're using that convey the sense that we're paying close attention, that we're conveying the sense I'm with you. And that might be as subtle as just a nod. It might be a gesture of an open hand. It might be the expression on your face or saying something like, or yes. This is a skill. It happens naturally for some of us, and then for others it might be something that'd be really fun to just think about. How can I expand my toolbox of using these cues? Another tool is validating, which is affirming that the feelings make sense. That might be, it makes sense that you were so upset. It sounds like you felt overlooked. That must have been so hard, right? That's maybe one of the most easy ones we can say. And of course, it's really important that we remember to validate positive emotions as well, because it makes them stronger and we can celebrate together. How wonderful. You must have been so excited. The next skill is exploring. So here's where we're opening things up kind of explicitly a little bit more. Tell me more about how you feel about this. Are you feeling more worried or more frustrated? And here it's really, really helpful to just keep our reflective stance and remember to not assume too much. It's so easy for us. Someone tells us a story and we're like, we're so in feelings ourselves. We assume that the other person is feeling the same thing that we are. Maybe they are. But here's a wonderful opportunity to kind of open that up and explore. The important thing to think about here is that we're trying to go deeper into the feelings rather than ask for more information about the circumstances that created the feelings. Super tempting to say, well, what did he do or what happened? Here, we're really focusing on exploring the emotions. So I want you to take a little moment to imagine a conversation with someone you care about. It could be a parent you work with. It could be your own parent, a child you work with, a supervisee, and they come to you feeling upset about something. First off, acknowledge how you know, what are the cues that you know that they are in feelings. And check with yourself. How does it feel to sit with somebody who's having strong feelings? Are there urges that you have? Urges to act. Now picture yourself responding in a way that just is holding space for them. What could you say that would be validating? And what could you say that gives them room to explore their feelings without asking more about the story? Finally, how does it feel if you check in your body to steer clear of solutions? If there's some anxiety there, can we welcome it? Can we surround it with love? Okay, so I'm going to now bring us back and talk about one more skill that might be just a little less familiar to you that we call in the fan bridging. And bridging is when we're making a very explicit shift out of feelings and more into thinking or doing. So, what would be the circumstances where that would be a good idea? Maybe we have spent time already hearing, understanding, validating the other person's experience, and the feelings are starting to be more contained. And we're ready to try something different. Or it may be that the person is really stuck, kind of in this perseverative thing, and they're just talking about their feelings, maybe without much affect. They have this kind of repetitive piece going on. That might be a cue to us. Maybe it's time to try something different. Or if the person needs more help and expertise than you can provide. So maybe it's outside of your scope of practice. If the parent shares something very scary about doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it, but we're probably going to shift from feelings into thinking so that we can get them the level of emotional support that is appropriate for the situation. So what does bridging look like? It's just this simple two-step process where first we are validating the feelings. Again, I hear how this is affecting you and how much you want things to change. And then we're offering an invitation. I wonder if we're ready to think together about what would help. It's an invitation. The person might say, I'm not ready for that. I'm still pretty freaked out. Great, but this is the beauty of the fan, is that we're always inviting. How is this sitting with you? How are we doing? Are we connected? And giving a lot of agency to the person you're working with. So that's the bridging skill. Now we're going to move on to collaborative exploration. Have you ever had the experience where you said to somebody, "This is driving me crazy," and they go immediately to solutions? My guess is you have had that experience, and my guess is that you've offered that experience to others too. I certainly have. Um, it's just such a human tendency, and it comes from a place of care. We don't want people that we care about to struggle or to feel uncomfortable. But we might also ask ourselves, whose discomfort am I trying to fix here? Can I stay regulated enough to tolerate their discomfort? Maybe a parent says to us, "This kid is a monster," and you notice your own spike of strong feelings, feelings that feel really urgent, that call for change. And so you jump to solutions. But what if we, in that moment, could remember our fan toolbox, go back to our calming skills for a second for us, move to the feelings wedge, and ask a few feelings about their emotional experience, and then try moving into thinking, collaborative exploration. One way to think about collaborative exploration is to picture a jewel or a prism. Thinking together is the process of turning the jewel into the light so that the light shines through each facet so that you can see the whole situation together more clearly. Thinking together using collaborative exploration slows the process down. It's about what's making what's below the surface more understandable. It's checking our assumptions, which is, of course, part of our reflective stance, staying poised between what we know and don't know. Imagine working with a mother who was recently enrolled in transitional housing due to interpersonal violence. And she says to you about her 4-year old who's crashing around the room, "He reminds me of his daddy." Knowing that this dad has been violent, you might feel your heart sink and assume that she's experiencing her child as out of control and potentially dangerous. And in many circumstances, that assumption would be accurate. It's a very common dynamic. And we'd be right to be worried that she thinks of her child in this way. But what if the provider shifted from worry into wonder and thought to ask a simple question like, "Tell me what you mean." And the mom says, "He's so funny and silly. His daddy made me laugh." Now the two of you are in a very different place. Now you're back in feelings as she considers the incredible complexity of her anger, her grief, and her loss. How different that path is than one that you could have taken, which is just to offer some developmental guidance about 4-year-olds not being dangerous. One simple question: what do you mean? One of the wonders of making space to think together is when the client has their own kind of aha moment. When you ask a really great question that leads them to make their own realization or discovery, it's so much more powerful than if you'd offered the insight yourself. So, for example, if I were to say to a dad, "Do you wonder what it feels like for your son when he gets so angry that he wants to smash things?" And then wait quietly. Perhaps this dad might respond, "Maybe he feels completely out of control. That's how I felt when I was little. Nobody knew how to stop me when I was a kid. Maybe he needs me to stop him." Nothing I could say, none of my great ideas and thoughts, none of my insight would be anywhere near as powerful as his deeply felt discovery. Providers who are trained in the fan say that giving up control is a relief. And by that, they mean they feel a lot less burned out because it's a lot of pressure to feel like you have to have the answer for everything. What a relief to know that you can facilitate someone finding their own answers. A supervisor whose team worked with the fan said, instead of trying to fix it, I know I need to just stay with my staff. In fan training, we talk about a set of very particular kinds of questions that could be asked. I'm not going to go through all of them. We've had lots of material already, but I'll give you a couple of examples. Some of them might just feel pretty straightforward to you. For instance, asking about changes desired. That could be a super juicy, interesting thing to ask about. If a parent is talking about a difficult situation, if you were to say, what would better look like? If this got solved, if this change were to happen, how would you know? What would better look like? That might be really interesting. Another set of exploratory kinds of questions here, and let's take views of important others. For some clients, that's going to be really important for you to ask, what do your aunties say about this? So that you can get a sense of all the forces, the cultural background, the various things that this person is anticipating and trying and weighing as they think about change. Or anticipating doing might be an interesting set of questions. They don't have to jump right into doing. You could spend some time just talking about that, testing the ground, trying it out. What might be a first step? Oh, okay. So tell me, what would it feel like to pick up the phone and call that person? How do you think you'd do that? Collaborative exploration is really fun, and just feeding your curiosity and the curiosity of the person that you're talking with is really a gift. The doing wedge of the fan. So here we're reading cues, feelings are contained. Now we've understood the problem pretty well. We've talked about it from all the different facets. And maybe it's time to move into capacity building, which is the doing wedge. And of course, it's called this because our hope is to grow the capacities of the people that we're working with. And this is the process where your own skill and expertise shows up. It's crucial. The work that you do, the things that you know are crucial and part of why clients, why families come to you in hope for change and hope for the services that you're able to offer. So in a fan training, we would spend some time also developing a set of kind of sub skills within capacity building, ways of helping folks take in more knowledge and understand what it is that they know. I've offered so much already today that I'm not going to go into all of them, but I do think it would be fun to just explore one idea, which I think is just so evocative, and that's the idea of drop and explore. This is hard for me. I will just admit, this is really hard for me. It's such great advice when you're talking with a family. You've got important information. They need your important information. Can you do it in such a way that you're just offering a drop, one idea in one breath, and then checking in with them? How are they taking that in? In other words, it's the exact opposite of what I've been doing for the last 90 minutes. This helps us stay so much more in tuned, helps us not get too far ahead of the other person. So what might that look like? It might sound like you offering a piece of knowledge and then checking in. Sometimes kids complain about being told no, but it can also help them feel safe. Have you ever heard that? Or if you're a supervisor, maybe saying to a supervisee, jotting a few words throughout the day might be able to help you not forget to write your case notes. What do you think of that? So it's really quite an interesting discipline to be this simple. So something for you to think about. How can I share what I know using drop and explore? The last wedge of the fan is integrating or reflecting. And we talked about that because this is where it kind of meets up again with the arc of the visit, this idea of reflecting at the end of the visit. So to remind you, that might look like, is there anything you'd like to remember from our time together today? Or tell me 3 words to describe your experience being a parent this week. It's really recognizing and building as a tool the practice of remembering and remembering together. So I'm going to take you into a little moment that we might think about as integration using some more somatic experience. First, why don't you take just a second, since I can't ask each of you individually, to think about or jot down what's something that you'd like to remember that we talked about today. If you want to write it in the chat, that would be great, but you don't have to. This is for you. So let's come back and do one more experience together. We have talked about some of the tensions, some of the forces that are embedded in the work of staying attuned to other people. This idea of the reflective stance and what it means to be aware of what's visible and to also appreciate the idea that there are things that are hidden, of being aware of what comes from the past, what belongs to the past potentially, and how the past is showing up in the present, of feeling the pull to act and choosing to wait and listen. We have these pretty interesting forces. What I'd like to leave you with is a sense that these tensions, which sometimes can feel like opposites, don't have to be in conflict with each other. And that by holding both, both past and present, both visible and invisible, both moving to action and waiting, we create more space within ourselves for knowledge and attunement, and perhaps eventually for action. So let's take a few moments to play with the idea of using our awareness of our bodies. If you're in a space where you feel comfortable standing for about 5 minutes, I invite you to do that. You don't have to. But now, whether you're standing or sitting, take a moment to just check in with your body one more time, to say hello to your nervous system. See how you're feeling after all this talking. If a little movement would feel good, do a little twist or roll of your shoulders, maybe shake your hands and feet, and then come back to settle. Take a few breaths. I'd like you to focus on your feet if you're standing, or your feet and your sits bones if you're seated. As you breathe, imagine that you're growing roots. These roots are your knowledge, your values, your program goals, your hopes for families, all that you bring, sending energy into the ground. And that the ground in turn is letting you know that you are safely rooted, that you are solid, that you are powerful. These roots give you a kind of sturdiness so that you can sway without being tipped over. And as you breathe into that power, notice where it flows into the rest of your body. And then bring your awareness up through your torso, into your shoulders, your neck, and your jaw. And imagine a sunflower that reaches towards the light and lets the energy of newness, of what's not known, of what's being grown into, flow out of the top of your head. You might play with shifting your awareness between the roots of your grounded feet and the energy and lightness of your head. Can you imagine that you are more spacious, more balanced, more ready for whatever your families bring? That this sensation of poise and spaciousness is a resource you can come back to help you stay attuned to the people you care about. Take a few more breaths and then bring your awareness back into your feet and your sits bones. Maybe press your feet into the floor. And when you're ready, come back to the group. Thank you all for giving me the chance to share these ideas with you today. I feel nurtured by your presence, by the space that the Foundation and Dr. Ben have created for us. I'm really excited to hear what our panelists are going to add to our discussion and to hear your questions. Thanks again for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Monet. I can definitely see why they call you Teacher Lisa. And I really found a lot of grounding in that attunement, but the match, mismatch, and repair was really, I think, inspiring to a lot of us. So we're really grateful. So excited to have you back later. And now